Hello and welcome to the last in Hilsmoran's opening up series of talks. Today we are addressing acoustics, post-pandemic and the future of our cities. I am here with Jack Richardson, acoustic consultant at Hilsmoran. Jack, I think it's fair to say that our acoustic environment changed somewhat in lockdown. Someone who hears, I guess, about these things all the time. What was your experience like?
Definitely agree. I think there were quite a few studies that showed people's appreciation for things like bird song and natural sounds increased tenfold over lockdown. So it was definitely, I think it's definitely acted to sort of shift our perception to the noise from the noise of traffic that usually sort of pollutes our ears to the more pleasant sounds that sort of help us repair and relax. It was quite challenging. It's been quite challenging for acoustics in general because obviously where there was less activity going on, we were still having to do site surveys and that sort of thing, and obviously measuring noise levels during a quiet period where the regulations were restricting people's movements and that sort of thing. It was quite a challenge. We had to rely quite heavily on some predictions and that sort of thing. So it was a bit more of a technical challenge to survey work throughout the pandemic. But it was interesting to see that, there's some areas where perhaps natural ventilation at the moment wouldn't be permissible because of the noise levels. They're actually naturally dropped down to lower levels that are more conducive for that sort of ventilation strategy. So it was almost a bit of a peak of what it could be if we were to, reduce our noise emissions.
Sure. And I'm going to move on to the sort of future cities angle in a second, but I just want to pick you up on trying to do your job under those circumstances. I mean, it must be extremely challenging to try and get an accurate measure for what an acoustic environment is going to be like in normal times.
It's not without its challenges. It was just limited movement. Road traffic was down. Airport movement was ceased to exist. Retail and that sort of thing were closed up. So we had to rely on previous data that we had captured, before the lockdown for similar sites. The same source tends to generate the same sort of noise levels, but in different environments. It's just the environment that sort of shapes that noise, should we say. So I think we did rely on what we previously captured for historic projects, and I think that was it was a good move to do that sort of thing. It was something endorsed by our Institute of Acoustics as well. But it's certainly something that we want to sort of we recommend validating it once everything does. Like now we're in a period where things are probably back up to round about normal, particularly in retail heavy areas. So we can definitely get back out and do some verification measurements and that sort of thing, just to be diligent.
You say that things are pretty much back to normal from an acoustic point of view now. I mean, are there any lessons we can immediately learn from the last year or so that might make for a more pleasant acoustic environment going forward, or is it a matter of waiting for greater shifts in the way we live our lives?
I think we're seeing some shifts already. Electric vehicles and that sort of thing are starting to creep into the market now. We're seeing shifts that, if potentially are regulated correctly, will definitely benefit and improve the acoustic environment within our cities mainly. I think acoustics and noise and the impact of those sorts of pollutants on health are becoming a lot more. People are becoming a lot more aware of them and a lot more concerned about them. We often see surveys and pieces of research undertaken by certain institutions that look to see, in a workplace, for example, what are the main complaints from the workforce, and what tends to increase stress levels and absenteeism and that sort of thing. And noise is always at the very, very top of that list, if not the top, or near the top at least. So we've been aware for a while that. But sort of silently aware, and maybe no one's really taken much action. But since we've obviously seen what it can sound like if you're working and living in a bit more quiet, then it's I'd imagine it would it would continue down that road, and we would start to see people be a bit more wary of the noise levels they're exposed to.
Okay, I'll come back to electric vehicles in a second, but let's just concentrate on the workplace now that you've mentioned it. I mean, I get sent an awful lot of material as a journalist, telling me about fantastic, how well-being has been thought about in a new office development, but that doesn't tend to be about acoustics. It's much more about planting and the quality of the light and so on and so forth. Is it the case that acoustics is increasingly being considered in that context?
I think so. I think it is. I think what people need to realise is that it's the combination of our senses and how they're being stimulated that shapes our perceptions and our experience within a building. It's although we split them down in engineering purposes into different disciplines, really the experience is interdisciplinary, so it needs to be seen and designed accordingly. It's no good just having natural sounds if the foliage and the greenery isn't there to go with it, or the thermal comfort might need to be synchronized with the lighting levels and that sort of thing. So it needs to make sense to our senses, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. So I think sound, in terms of biophilic design, sound has always been one of the key elements that a lot of experts try and push as well, and saying that, hang on, it's not just about what you're seeing and what you're feeling, it's about what you're hearing as well. And we've been pondering on that over the last couple of months about talking about how do we get on the subject of how do we encourage people back into the workplace post-pandemic, because that's going to be a big challenge for the industry and for our clients in particular. We really need to make sure that the buildings are there to offer a benefit that they wouldn't otherwise get outside of the office. So things like biophilia, it's great for health and well-being, and it does result in a happier workforce overall. And like I say, acoustics is a big component of that design ethos. So I think we will see that coming to the forefront, and that's something that I've been speaking to the industry about as well.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's move from the office, so the sort of microcosm, to the macro level, to the city level. You mentioned electric vehicles. I was walking through Bankside over the bank holiday weekend. I nearly got run over by a Tesla because it was absolutely silent. It was absolutely silent, and it does just show, quite what a massive difference electric vehicles could make.
Yeah. I think I've been in the same. It wasn't a Tesla of mine. It was a what did I nearly get hit by? A Prius. I think this is when they first sort of started to come onto the roads. But yeah, I mean there are regulations now that require manufacturers for vehicles to include an AVAS system, or an alerting system at low speeds, just to alert people that it's there. And its main function is from a road safety perspective. However, when you get past those low speeds, it's usually, I think it's around 11 miles per hour, or maybe up to 16 miles per hour. The tyre noise on the road is then the dominant factor. So actually, the difference in noise levels between traditional vehicles we're seeing now and electric vehicles, there isn't much difference above those speeds. However, obviously there's a marked difference below those speeds, where the engine noise, the byproduct of that engine working, is no longer there. So that does create a road safety concern, and we're seeing manufacturers of cars and even TfL now have a fleet of electric buses out that have a purposely designed alert system that they engage some consultants to help design it. And I think it's definitely a positive step in the right direction. However, I think if they're not regulated properly, in isolation they sound okay, but once you actually have hundreds, probably thousands of these things going through a road during a day, and you have a mixture of sounds that have been purposely designed by each company, I think the picture the audio picture, if you like, could start to change and actually become something that isn't pleasant to listen to, and probably road traffic as it currently stands may even be more desirable in a very worst case. So I think the regulations go some way currently, but there are discussions within the industries as to whether they go far enough in protecting not just road users and visually impaired pedestrians, but also protecting the health of the people that these electric vehicles are going past, the buildings that they're going past.
Sure. And in terms of when we might get to the point where, that's the sort of dominant acoustic atmosphere on our roads, are we talking a decade, 2 decades? How long is it until that change occurs, do you think?
I think the date that most people have in their head is the 2030, 2035 date, where the government have said no more non-electric vehicles, so no more petrol, diesel, hybrids. It's going to be all electric vehicles, newly manufactured electric vehicles. So I think that's when we'll really start to see a tipping point, if you like. But obviously there's going to be a number of years before the current vehicles that are already on the road start to be either phased out, or I suppose there may be some regulation that come in place that push people down the route of electric vehicles quicker than they perhaps would have. So it's difficult to put a date on it. It is really difficult to put a date on it. But I think it's safe to say that it's, if we do see this shift in noise climate, I think developers need to be mindful of that now, because we are talking 10 plus years in the future. I think I'm confident in saying that. And that's nothing in terms of the building lifespan.
No.
Generally. So I think they should be looking now at future-proofing their buildings and thinking about what ventilation strategies or other uses that would otherwise at the current, given the current environment, be prohibited by noise levels. I think then they should be thinking, can we get away with that in the future? We don't have to knock a building down in 10 years and rebuild something. We can just repurpose the buildings that were already there, but we're using our predictions and understanding of what's going on in the industry and where it's heading to make informed decisions about the future noise climate and what that might look like in terms of a building design. So I think it's a really interesting topic at the moment, but I mean it's speculation, I suppose. But it looks like that's where it's heading.
And other technologies which will come forward and have an impact on our acoustic environments. I guess I'm thinking drones, really.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen a few buildings that they're making allowance for drone charging points on the roof.
That's interesting
in our cities. So they're anticipating that that's going to be the primary delivery method, I suppose, to commercial buildings. Amazon might have a fleet of drones that go out and deliver packages over the city and just drop them into the buildings from roof level. So it's really interesting. But I think there's been some research done. I think it was even by NASA did some research that seemed to imply that people find drone noise considerably more annoying than road traffic.
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the frequency, and I mean they don't tend to be as loud. But again, if you've got hundreds of them flying above you at any given time, then that combined noise level would start to be quite audible, I think, above the prevailing levels. So that's something that needs to be regulated again, I think. Yeah. But I don't think it's necessarily. It's quite a new technology, isn't it? And I think that it would have to be controlled at source. I think primarily they would need to look at trying to quieten the actual fans down on the drone, or make them a bit more directive, so it sort of pushes the noise up into atmosphere as opposed to down to street level and building level. But I'm positive that someone will come up with something that would help out in that regard fairly quickly, I'd imagine.
Fantastic. Okay, well, look, Jack, it's been really fascinating talking to you. Much to mull over. But thank you very much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You're welcome. You too. Cheers.